Hello everyone, this is James Shore with another how-to video. I'm recording this on June 8th, 2015. In the last episode, we had just finished getting our source code checked into Git so we could have good version control. So if we ever make a mistake, we can get back to it, and so we can share code with other people on our team, or in this case, so I can share it with you. Now we are ready to automate our build, and I want to take a moment to explain what I mean by automating our build. When you're working on any software project of any significance whatsoever, there are a series of steps you have to go through in order to get the software to run and to confirm that it works correctly. For most people, when they learn how to program, they just do this manually. They type in, they type in whatever they need to type to make it go. In a professional environment, your applications are typically large enough that just typing in what you need to do in order to launch the application or to test it or to do whatever is actually a fairly large and complicated series of steps. So for documentation purposes, and also because these steps tend to change over time, it's very important to have this written down somewhere. How do you actually build the system and test? By build, I typically mean make the system go and make sure that it's working properly, testing it. Even today, for a lot of professional teams, they just store this information maybe in an out-of-date file and the collective knowledge of all the people on the team. That doesn't work all that great. It's not good. So the Agile movement really brought emphasis to the idea of the automated build. And this is basically taking that sequence of steps that you need in order to make sure your software works and automating it, putting it in some kind of software that does those steps for you. And it turns out that it's much, much easier to automate your build from the beginning of the project than to try to add it in later. If you do it at the very beginning when there's really very little to do, and then just incrementally add to it, it's very easy to keep this automated build up to date, as long as you continue to pay attention to it and put stuff into it, which not all teams are good at. Although I'm describing what professional teams do here, I'm describing what the good professional teams do. There are a lot of teams out there that are still doing manual builds. And unfortunately, they pay the price of when somebody new comes onto the team not knowing how to work, or when they go back to old versions, not being able to get those old versions to work. At any rate, that's what I want to do in this episode. I want to create an automated build. Now, that may seem strange. We don't have any code yet, so there's nothing to run, which means that our automated build is going to be really, really easy to make. It's going to be very small and simple. And like I said, if you start working on this from the beginning, and you keep adding to it as you need to, it's actually really easy to do. And this is a core idea in a lot of Agile engineering philosophy, is incrementally build your systems up rather than putting them all in at once. So to do this, we're going to we need a tool. We need some sort of program to do our build for us. I, of course, am going to use JavaScript. So let's make a new JavaScript file. I'm going to call it build.js for now. And you'll see that my IDE, WebStorm, creates this template for me. This is how I have WebStorm set up. If you're using WebStorm, you may not see this exact template. You will need something like this. Typically, you're going to have some copyright information, although that's optional. Then you're going to have this little bit of boilerplate, and I'll explain what this does later, but this is called an IIFE, and you'll typically find it around all of your JavaScript programs, and the reason for that is it protects against some errors. Then we have this use strict statement, which again helps protect against errors. This tells JavaScript to not let certain sloppy programming styles get by. We will go into what these mean more in the future. And then we can actually write our program. So what I want to write is just a hello world. That's typically how I'll start with anything. So to have our program say hello world to us, we need to use the console object, call the log method on it. And I'm assuming that in your programming education, you've learned what objects and methods are. So I'm not going to bother going into those details. And just say hello world. So we're going to pass in a string. In JavaScript, strings are surrounded with double quotes or single quotes. And that's it. Now, if we go to the command line, we can make this program run by typing node and then the name of the program, which in this case you can see is build.js. So I can say node build.js, and if I did this right, we should see hello world come out. So there we go. That's a very simple program. And I'm actually going to go ahead and check this in. I typically won't check in quite this frequently, but when you're working with version control, especially a system like Git that is designed to have lots of small frequent check-ins, it's good to check in after every chunk of work, after you finish an idea. And in this case, the idea is, we got a program to work. We got a basic JavaScript program running. So I'm going to check that in. We have build.js, which is untracked. So we're going to say git add dot to add that in. Now it's telling us that it is tracked and it's ready to commit. So I'm going to say git commit -am. And then there's a lot of different ways of typing your messages. There's some strong opinions about the right way to create a commit message. I don't worry about it too much, to be honest. I try to keep it less than one line. So down to about here on the next line. So it's less than 80 characters. But other than that, I don't worry about it too much. So we got a basic hello world program. Let's put that in quotes. Running. So it is good to, in your commit comments, put in something that will help you recognize and remember what you did, and so that other people can look and see what you did. Typically, you'll want your commit comment to be about the idea that you created rather than the details, because you can get that by looking in version control. You can get a diff that will tell you exactly what was changed. So your commit message should provide sort of an overview of what you've done. But other than that, follow whatever guidelines your team has. Some people will say that it's got to be in title case in less than 50 characters and have a whole paragraph underneath it. Some people will say keep it less than 80 characters and make it simple like I do. Again, whatever your team says is the right way to write your commit messages, just do it that way. So there we have it. We have checked in our simple hello world. Now let's make an automated build. What we need our automated build to do is give us an unambiguous success or failure message when it finishes. We're going to be running this all the time. And so what we want is for us to run the build, look at it, and say, yes, that worked. So, and for us, because we have nothing to do, all we need to do is have that success message. And the way I do that is by put build OK with a couple of blank lines at the top. \n, if you remember, means put in a blank line. That is it. That is our build. I'm using up arrow here to go back through our command history and run node build.js again. There we go. That is an automated build. It's just that simple. Of course, we're not quite done yet. Now we will add to this automated build as we add more things to our software, but this is the basics. Let's go ahead and document this in our README. So if we go into the README and there's this piece right here about how to run the code on your computer, I'm going to say to run the build, type node build.js. So there we go. That's one concept. I'm going to check that and we have an automated build. Now this idea of working in really small steps and committing as you go, I think this is something that's very valuable. If you haven't gotten used to doing this in your studies to date, I recommend that you start practicing it now. The smaller pieces you work and the more you verify your work as you go in these really small pieces, the easier it is to catch mistakes and to recover from mistakes when you make them. All right, we are not quite done yet. We do have an automated build here, but there's some features that an automated build needs that we aren't supporting yet. Typically, you want your automated build to be self-documenting. You want it to do some sort of command line processing because typically there will be various options you want to provide to your automated build. So we need to have some way of dealing with those command line options. And then finally, we need something called dependency resolution. A build often consists of lots of different pieces, some of which need to happen before others. And of course, in a program, we can write, do this and then do that and then do that. But for an automated build, the ordering is often a bit more complicated than that. And sometimes we want to use our command line to say, do this piece, but not this piece. And a way of resolving those needs is called dependency resolution. We'll see that in a bit. Now, rather than just building all this into our build.js, a smarter thing to do would be to use a dedicated build tool. And that's what I want to show you next. JavaScript has a million build tools. Actually, it has a million tools in general. People complain about how many options there are. There's nothing wrong with having lots of options, but it can be hard to sort through all the choices. What we want is a tool that gives us the things that we've talked about so far. So self-documenting build, command line processing, dependency resolution. And we also need a tool that's going to allow us to write straightforward JavaScript code rather than writing a configuration file. Because in your build, you always end up over time having more complex needs than it first appears. So you want the ability to write arbitrary code to do whatever you need. And we want our build to be fairly straightforward. Now, the most popular tools for JavaScript for build automation are Grunt and Gulp. But I am not going to use either one of those because I think they fail in a couple of key areas. Gulp doesn't have any command line processing, and Grunt tends to focus more on configuration than code. So what I use is a tool called Jake. This is the simplest, most straightforward build tool that I can find. It is basically just a thin wrapper on top of writing pure JavaScript like we have here. To read about this yourself, go to jakejs.com and click Docs, and you'll have probably more documentation than you care for. But to get this installed, what we're going to do is we're going to install it from npm, the Node Package Manager. The way we install it is we say npm install Jake, and then I'm going to have you put in the -g option. And this is actually a mistake, and I'll explain why in the next episode, but we're going to do this for now. -g says put Jake in the global repository so that we can run it from the command line like this. So now we'll type Jake, and it fails saying there is no Jake file. By the way, take a moment to think about why this is not the right way to install Jake. Remember that our goal here is to make a reproducible build so that everybody on the team can see the same results we do. What's wrong with this? I'll let you think about that. We'll cover that in the next episode. So now that we have Jake running, what it wants is a file named jakefile.js. So I'm going to rename our existing build script to be jakefile.js. And the way Jake works is it just runs whatever your Jake file is, or you can actually pass in a different file name using -jas jakefile or the -f option. But it will run your Jake file and just run it like normal code, but it will also add in some additional global functions that are useful for us. So if I type Jake right now, we should still see build OK come out. And we do. But then Jake aborts saying that it can't find the task default. What Jake does is it will run whatever task you put on the command line. So if I say build, it'll look for a task called build. If I type Google, it'll look for a task called Google. But if you don't type anything, it'll look for a task called default, and it can't find it, so that's why it's failing. So to make this work, I'm going to add a task. We do that by just calling a function called task. We give it a name, in this case is default, and then we pass in a function. In JavaScript, you can pass in functions just like you would pass in any other variable. The way you do that is with this syntax right here, function parenthesis, open bracket, close bracket. And then whatever you type in there is the body of your function. So I'm going to type in log, hello, I'm the default task. And there you go. Note that you should have semicolons at the end of your statements in JavaScript. They're not strictly required, but it's good form. Now if I do this, when I run Jake, you'll see that it runs build OK, and then it will run this default task for us. You can see build OK, hello, I'm the default task. So what's happening here is Jake has added this new task function that we can call. It's running this whole function through and then looking for whatever default task we've provided. If we made another task called Google, just for example, then that would not run unless we said Jake Google. So there is our command line processing. Whatever we type in after the Jake is the task that will run. You can also provide a description. If you call the DESC function right before a task, that will become the documentation for that task. So this will be our default build, and this will be pure ridiculosity. Now that I've put that in there, I can run jake-t or -- tasks, and it will show us the documentation for our tasks. So you can type Jake default or Jake Google. And again, -t will do the exact same thing. It has to be a capital though. So that's an automated build. What we need to do now is actually make our build work properly. So rather than putting our build OK in the top level, because that's running before anything is actually getting built, I'm going to move that into our default, get rid of this Google function, and now there we have our standard build, and it is self-documenting. And Jake has the ability to do other command line processing that we don't need right now, but we will get into in the future. Okay, let's go ahead and check that in. You're going to see that we've deleted a file and we've added a new file. So I need to say git add dot, and you'll see that it's figured out that we renamed that file, and then I can say git commit -am using Jake for our build. And you know what? I just realized I should have updated our README to describe how to run this build. What we need to do is we need to first install Jake, npm install jake-g, and then run the build. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new commit that says that we documented how to use Jake. All right, that is our automated build. Your exercise for this episode is to go ahead and get a similar automated build set up for your own code. Now, if you're feeling like doing something more advanced, go ahead and check out the other two popular build tools I described, which are Grunt and Gulp, and try to get a simple build running in each of those tools as well. That's a bit of an advanced exercise. If you don't feel like doing it, it's just fine. That's it for this time. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.